Welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Pat Jones. I'm CEO of the Women's Leadership Institute. And we're so excited today to have Sophia DeCaro, the Director of Government of Planning, the Department of Planning and Budget, and also a member of our WLI board. There's been so much talk about how do we attract and retain talent in our state. And rarely, I think if you looked at other states, rarely would you find states leading the way like they are in Utah. And to listen to the great things that our state is doing on this very important issue in attracting and retaining women, and particularly as it has to do with labor trends and returnships back to work. So we're really, really excited to have Sophia DeCaro present this webinar today, and I will turn that time over to you right now, Sophia. You go right ahead.
Great, thank you, Pat, and thanks to you and your team for everything that you're doing as well. You're making a positive difference in our community, and we certainly love and appreciate all the things you're doing. So today we're really excited to talk a little bit more about what the state of Utah is doing. And thought it would be great to bring one of our senior economists, Robbie Polson, to the table to provide some labor trends and talk a little bit about that. And then also John Barron, he is the director of our Division of Human Resource Management. It's basically the HR for the state of Utah. And so what I'm going to do is maybe turn a little time to them to just introduce themselves, give us a little bit about your background and introduction. And as you're introducing yourselves, if you could just share a mentor who influenced you being where you are today. And why don't we start with you, John?
Very good. Thanks, Sophia. And Pat, nice to meet you. I know you've been engaging with other members of our team, Wes Porter, Director Jenny Reese, and we're excited for the things you're helping us accomplish. We do try to stay ahead, and I think it's because of the labor market condition. It's leaders like you who can keep pushing us forward. So thank you for your resources and for your leadership in getting us in better places in this space. I am John Barron. I just say I'm the HR guy for the state, but sometimes people like titles. So I am the division director for human resource management, and I'm not a politician, and I don't like politics. I like doing HR work. So I help support the governor and all of the leaders in that space really fulfill the mission of the agencies, which we have many, 21,000 employees across the executive branch. So I get to wake up every day and give my all to the citizens of Utah through serving. And it's been a really fun opportunity for me. On a personal level, I'm always willing to brag. Married the love of my life last year, and then 6 weeks ago, started our family. So I'm still in goo goo gaga mode and absolutely loving it unabashedly. My wife and my in-laws just arrived from England last night. So we're having a good time and just loving life. I studied HR and got my master's in HR at Purdue, and then landed a job in Cincinnati. And I think most kids who get their MBA think they're going to change their world with their first job. And I landed at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, Ohio, and was managing expatriate compensation. I'm telling you the story to answer the mentor question. And in 2008, 2009, A.G. Lafley, the CEO, was a little ahead of that recession that was coming and said, hey, find us $70 million in savings in expatriate compensation. And I didn't know up from down in a $60 billion organization. And so I was presenting some recommendations for how to influence expatriate compensation. And I get to the end of a tricky point, of which we normally watch Sophia or Nate explain. And I would say something like, do you understand? And it was me checking for comprehension. And at the end of my presentation, a senior vice president asked for a few minutes me to walk back with his office. His name was Rich Postler. And he said, do you know how condescending you sound when you ask a bunch of people, do you understand? And he said, I think you need some help. And I said, I think you're right. And Rich Postler, who was serving at the time as a senior vice president, big title at Procter & Gamble, has become a dear mentor of mine. I stumbled into him and was really grateful for two reasons. One, I grew up in Idaho. It was a very heterogeneous situation, and Rich was an active member of the LGBT community at the time, and I hadn't yet interfaced in that space. And at the time, say 2008, the world knew what diversity was, but we weren't talking about really inclusion or access as additional elements of EDIA. And Rich became really influential in how I represent typical HR as a profession. And so I think Rich gets a lot of credit. I also try to give him a lot of blame. He sometimes I can get a little off kilter, and I just really appreciate who he's been to get me here and wrapping that little Idaho boy up and saying, I got you. I'm going to help you do some things. So really grateful for him as my mentor.
Thanks, John. And he mentioned Nate on our call too. He's my deputy director and is also in the audience listening in today. So we'll transition now to Robbie, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and talking about a mentor who influenced you to be where you are today.
Sure. Thank you, Sophia, and happy to be here, everybody. As was mentioned, my name is Robbie Poulsen. I'm one of the senior economists at the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. I worked for the state since 2015. I started as a research analyst, and then I moved up to a director position in the juvenile justice arena. While I was doing that, I was also in graduate school, and after I received my PhD in economics from the University of Utah, I came to work here at GOPB as an economist. So I've been very lucky along this way to have a number of really important mentors in my life who have made such a big difference for me. But the one that gets the bulk of the credit for me being where I am today has to be Professor Richard Fowles from the University of Utah. So Richard is a wonderful mentor to many students here in Utah and globally. He teaches in Thailand and in other parts of the world as well as here. And he really makes it a point of taking students under his wing, especially those of us that may not fit into your usual demographic and get immediate attention from your like traditional economics or math professors. So he really helped instill in me a great interest in statistics. He helped support me through my dissertation, and ultimately he let me know of the job opening that I started off in with the state. So I can't say enough nice things about Professor Fowles. I wish there were more like him in academia.
That's great. Thank you, Robbie. Well, with that, we'll just transition right in then to some of the labor trends you're seeing. So as you know, Utah's unemployment rate has been incredibly low even before the pandemic. And would you mind walking us through some of the trends that we're seeing now? And that way, maybe that can generate some interesting discussion.
I am happy to do that, Sophia. And again, thank you so much. So I have put together a couple of slides to just help visualize some of the summary that I want to present to you all today. And hopefully have a great discussion around the labor market trends and what we're seeing in the economy currently. So if we look at our first slide, we do see that unemployment was extraordinarily low here in Utah and the US before the pandemic-related economic recession. We see that we were in Utah near historic low rates. And then we see this huge uptick as the effects of the pandemic took hold. And as we know, took hold disproportionately by socioeconomic demographic and industry. But we see also that we had a very quick recovery in terms of our unemployment reaching back down to those levels that we saw before the pandemic. And now here in Utah, we've actually reached historic lows at 1.9% a couple of months ago. One thing to point out about this graphic is, and sorry, I should pause here and just kind of walk through this. So as I mentioned, this is the unemployment rate through time. We have Utah here in the blue line, the US in the yellow line. That color scheme is going to be carried throughout this presentation. So just take note of that, please. And we see, very importantly, for both the US and Utah, these very low unemployment rates currently. There's not a latest number out for Utah for August 2022 for unemployment, but the most recent estimates for the US indicate that the rate did go up slightly from 3.5% to 3.7%. So one of the first times that we're seeing in this post-pandemic environment, even a slight uptick. So next slide, please. Unsurprisingly, the pre and post-pandemic recession periods largely entailed growth in economic output. So low unemployment, high economic output. Here again, we see that convention of throughout time, something being measured. Here it's gross domestic product to estimate economic output. And we see that we're trucking along, and then suddenly the pandemic hits and boom, we see a huge hit to our economic output. But this is quickly followed by regaining of economic foothold in both the state and in the nation. Another important thing to note, though, is that similar to the unemployment rate, with us seeing that small drop off in the last month, we see that in the first quarter of 2022, we saw a slight decline in output in terms of quarter-over growth. It's not displayed here, but we also experienced that. At least the latest estimates indicate that we experienced that as a nation. Even though it was a smaller decline, it was still a slight decline in 2022. So, well, we had low employment, high output, and I'm talking pre-pandemic, a little signal of the chance of short-run impediments. Before the pandemic, economists were starting to use such terms as another roaring 20s when they were talking about what at least the first years of this decade would look like for our economy. Now, with the advantage that we have of hindsight, we might correct them and instead dub the era something like the era of roaring inflation, right? And that brings us to our next slide. So this graph shows the year-over growth in headline, meaning all of the goods measured by the consumer price index, product index, and core, meaning all of the goods less the very volatile series of food and energy. So here we're seeing what estimates of inflation are over from the periods of the 1970s to the most recent data, which is August of 2022. Those data just came out this week. And we see that, as we know, throughout the 70s and 80s, we had these periods of high inflation that were a huge concern for the economy, and there were a number of implications that were tied to that. And then through the early 2000s, inflation wasn't, such a concern. And we all kind of just I think took it for granted or forgot about it, or, well, we're doing so well, and who cares about inflation? Well, after the COVID-19 related pandemic, we suddenly see changes in demand, supply chain issues, huge amounts of federal stimulus dollars coming into the economy, as well as that quick recovery. And that confluence of factors led to this spike, as we've all probably personally felt in our lives as consumers, in prices. So now we can go on to the next slide. And I fast forwarded that. With inflation, we've all been hearing about the chance that the Fed might induce another rate hike. They're meeting this coming week, and with inflation having moderated a bit, but economists were hoping it would moderate a bit more. It's still growing, and we're expecting that it's very possible that the Federal Reserve will institute yet another rate hike. The idea of this, of course, is to help cool the economy. And usually when we experience these kind of economic cooling periods, we see with it drops in employment and correspondingly increases in the unemployment rate. However, with the current labor market conditions, economists are pretty uncertain about the level or the chance that we'll even see a substantial decline in employment or what that might look like. And here's where we can get to that next slide. So while this is admittedly a pretty busy graphic, I hope that the time it takes, the energy it takes to digest it is worth the insight that it provides. And what it shows here are two different things, which I'm usually not a fan of having double axes on a graph, but here I hope it's justified. So on the left hand y-axis, we see job openings rate. The lines that correspond to that rate are the dark blue and the yellow solid lines. Again, dark blue being Utah, yellow being the US. And then we look to the other axis for this ratio of unemployed persons per job opening. And we look to the dotted blue and dotted yellow lines for the trends over the years in that. So the unemployed persons job opening is really kind of, I think, an insightful and kind of fun statistic, and that it helps you to understand how many unemployed persons are available for the jobs that are currently available. So a 1 would mean that there's 1 person per 1 open job. Anything less than a 1 indicates that there's more job openings than number of unemployed persons available to fill them. So we see here that, well, the job openings rate has fallen a bit recently, that we have been at extraordinary levels of employment growth over the past year or so. We also see, when we look at the unemployed persons per job opening, that we're well underneath that 1-to-1 job unemployed person per job ratio here in Utah and in the US, with Utah's ratio being as low as 0.3. So this is signaling that we have tremendous job growth. We don't have enough employed persons to fill the jobs that we have open, even though we are seeing some moderating in the rate of job openings. And now we can go to the next slide. So next we might ask, okay, so we have a low unemployment rate. We have more jobs that are more people seeking employees than employees seeking jobs. Are there folks who are sidelined, who are not employed or not actively seeking employment, that we might reach out to help fill this outstripping of labor demand to labor supply? And the one thing that helps us to see whether or not we have that cushion is the labor force participation rate. So this is, again, that rate of folks who are either employed or actively seeking employment over the total number of folks who are of working age, and also fulfill some other qualifications, but those basically who are available to work. So we see here in Utah that, again, before the pandemic, we were trucking along. We had a pretty high labor force participation rate. That dropped off, as it did for the nation with the pandemic-related recession. But then we quickly bounced back, with Utah being pretty extraordinary here, as we are in a number of areas. But we came back to a level of what we might think of as normal labor force participation or high labor force participation very quickly, even relative to that of the nation after the last recession. And we see that while here in Utah, we've maybe begun to flatten out, that we're still at a very high rate, indicating that our labor market is still extraordinarily tight, not just in that we have low employment, we have a lot of employment opportunities, but we just don't have a ton of sidelined workers to fill the jobs. At a national level, we see that the labor force participation rate has ticked up recently and is coming closer to pre-pandemic levels, but still quite isn't there, indicating that possibly there is some cushion there. So with that, I'm going to let the time be turned over to others to discuss how we might address that.
Great, thank you, Robbie. And I know that you're always watching indicators and to try to predict what's going to happen next. Are there maybe before transitioning over, are there any key indicators you might be watching right now?
Yeah, so keeping an eye on job openings and unemployed folks per job opening, I think is important. Consumer confidence, which we haven't talked about here, will also be something that's important as we see the markets react to whatever the Fed decides that they're going to do next week. And of course, the latest output numbers that will come out for the third quarter, which if others are looking at that, I would advise not to just look at the growth itself, whether it's positive or negative, but look at the components that are driving that either downward or upward growth rate.
Well, that's great. And I know Robbie's done a great job. I should say Dr. Polson has done a great job walking us through the labor force and labor force participation in particular. And so this is a great transition into kind of what the state of Utah has done to tap into that labor force to bring in people back into participate in our labor force. And so with that, why don't we turn it to John and give us some insight on the Return Utah program and how how that has evolved and maybe some stats from that. Go ahead, John.
You bet. Thank you. When I get to talk about how the state of Utah is participating in reaching deeper into that marginalized or that group that doesn't realize that they're either welcome or lack the confidence or whatever skill set they perceive. Typically 3 R's. It's the returnship, it's rural, and it's remote. And we've been able to really move the needle on all of those. The first one that I don't get any of the credit for, because we've just had the privilege of working under the direction of Lieutenant Governor Henderson, is the Return Utah program, which is the first, we believe, and we reached out to a couple different entities in the public sector to introduce a Return Utah, which is ultimately a returnship, or it's an internship for those who have had meaningful careers before. Typically, those who have taken a break, usually due to childcare reasons. And typically skewed with heavy female or heavy women in that space. The Return Utah program, we were charged to stand up a program quickly, quick for state government in particular. So we connected with some private entities who had done this, and we chose to grow slow so we could do it right. So we've been through 3 total cohorts with a number of 33 graduating. So I expect that number to double in the next year. Now that we've kind of done this 2 or 3 times, I always teach good, better, best. We did it good. We've done it better. And now we're doing our best. We hired a program manager straight from the Return Utah pool. She came to us as a returner, applied as a returner, and now works for DHRM full time. Of those 33, 70%, 69% of them have been women, and 91% of them have found long-term employment somewhere. So extremely successful in that space. 84 of them work within the state themselves. So we're starting our fourth, I think last week we started our fourth cohort. Again, a relatively small number still. We're fine tuning a few things, adding a mentor program internally, and sort of a rotational amongst senior level leaders. But the thing that's most interesting to measure is sure, 91% ending with long-term employment somewhere is a great brag. But what we really like on the exit is 93% of these graduates, or these people who've completed the returnship program, comment that they have a greater sense of confidence. 92% of them say they have a skill set expansion. I think we know what this population looks, feels like, and thinks what they are. And we, this returnship program just helps shake off some rust and reestablish some confidence in the space that they live, thrive in, and can succeed in. And you don't really have to change your recruitment process. You just have to know who to recruit or what groups to connect with. This is not the majority. I don't have this data, but anecdotally, we're getting our candidates because we've gotten media exposure, or because of anecdotally the walking group that mother is in, and saying, oh, I applied in the returnship. And we've had multiple applicants through those word of mouth associations. So this isn't posting on Indeed. That population is not looking. They don't know they're valued anecdotally, and they don't know they're needed. And so they're sitting out, and we're helping them opt in through targeted, right? Through targeted conversation to say, we want you, and we have flexible hours, right? So we know that those skills develop quickly. No, I'll pause there. I think I have 2 more R's to cover. Are there questions to the returnship program itself, or thoughts? Am I missing something, Sophia, that you want me to hit there?
No, I think it's great. We can open it up for a question. Maybe I'll just share an example within our own office participating in this program. 20 years ago, I was in the budget office and was pregnant with 2 or 3 other women at the time. We were all budget and policy analysts, and each one of them left to start families. And through this program, we had the opportunity to recruit one of those mothers back to the office, master's degree, trained, knew the job, knew what she was doing, so needed very little training. And now we're able to give her a flexible work arrangement, and it's worked out great. We get to benefit from a super smart, talented person on the team, and she gets to benefit by re-engaging into the workforce, but also doing it in a way that enables her to transition back in. She's still working some part-time hours, but she's doing this at home, and we see it as a tremendous success. We pulled her on to be part of our permanent staff, and we did that through this program. And so that's just an example of, I think, the power behind this program and some of the things that John said. Are there any questions about the program itself before we have John transition?
Sophia, there's a good question by Patty Cook, our own Patty Cook, that I think is really helpful for our work.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead. Do you want to?
And they reach out to figure out how to start a program. I'm happy to jump in here. So first, yes, while I'm as the senior leader, my only job is to communicate and make decisions. So I'm just here communicating. The doer of the work is Cheyenne Barker, and she's in Disneyland. I think that's the reason why I'm here. She has some time with her family. But I would definitely put you in contact with her. And I think here's the reason why I think it's working so well. And again, it's going to sound somewhat cliche, but there's executive buy-in, right? That's a private sector lingo, but the lieutenant governor goes out of her way to engage not only with the program, but with those who are in the program. And she connects. So really significant executive buy-in. And then the second is we've been given permission for the space to do this. And that's what happens when you're looking to innovate, is innovation requires either resources, so financial, or requires time. And they have said, push things away to make this successful. So we have the ability, and of course we were given funding to hire our first ever returnship coordinator and manager. And sure, that may not be, on tight bottom or tight balance sheets, but we were given the chance to innovate, and we were able to brainstorm. And we spent most of last summer, I'd say I was still trying to figure out how state government works, and I spent more time in the details of standing up a returnship program with Lieutenant Governor. That's probably why I'm still asking Sophia if she'll be my mentor and help me figure out how the rest of state government works, because we were neck deep in a really great quality returnship program. And seeing the chat, keeping this going, I apologize if I'm taking all of this here. What type of positions, industries are the graduates finding employment from the returnship? So I'm going to give you a somewhat vague answer, right? We have over 20 agencies, and it can go anywhere from a public information officer to a financial analyst one, right? These are, majority of them are actually not entry-level positions, to a IT specialist, to a returnship manager. So I'm not going to be able to give you data that says, 40% of them are becoming financial analyst one, because we have over 1,200 job descriptions in the state of Utah, and I don't think any one of them they've all been individualized. What we had to do, Kelly, and maybe a little context there, was because of the executive buy-in, and last summer we approached executive directors or deputy directors and said, here's the ideal position, and by the way, here's the ideal manager. This manager needs to have, for the first few weeks, 2 to 3 hours a week to coach, develop, strengthen, find confidence for, and get it. So we acknowledged, and I sometimes it probably comes across somewhat offensive to the returner, but we said, we're going to handhold you until you feel the confidence to be on your own, right? And that's where we went and looked for managers and said, how tight do we want this? So I don't have the positions or industries. I could take that conversation offline, but we manicured and massaged our managers to say, we need this from you. It will be 6 hours a week. It will be you one-on-one, reminding them that they can save to PDF, and they remember how to save to PDF, right? Those were real concerns that were coming out of our returners. So they've varied. So
And John,
I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, just to, maybe to elaborate, do you have an idea of how many of those that have found employment have been able to be retained by the state, or is it the majority of them? Yeah,
91% have employment, 84% within state employment. And let me tell you anecdotally, again, I know you've got me talking about something I love, so I apologize for monopolizing, but what happens is our executive directors or lieutenant governor stay so close. Our first cohort was only 6 people, 6 returners. And at the end of it, not every agency had money to actually hire that person. But guess what was happening? Oh my gosh, Tiffany Clayson, who the executive director of Division of Alcohol Beverage Control, absolutely was getting text saying, Margaret Bussey, who runs our commerce, right, was saying, I need to find a job for this person. Tiffany, what do you got? And literally executive directors were messaging saying, this person is so valuable to me, but I don't have the funds to retain this $70,000 employee because it wasn't entry level. What can you do? And we started, and that's the One Utah way, right? We were sharing our talent, and that was unbelievable. Cost savings to the state, man, Pat, you're gonna make me blush. I don't have a cost savings estimate today, and to be honest, we talked about the intent of the program at the time. It actually, we directly approached it with Lieutenant Governor and her chief at the time, Chief Robeson. Cost savings wasn't one of the priorities, so I haven't measured it yet. And I hope that's an easy enough scapegoat, because coming from the private sector, trust me, I'm after that cost savings. But in this instance, we weren't challenged with that at this time. I'm trying to find a link for a video to maybe share with you. We've started branding this and marketing to it. So towards the end of this, I'll share it, or you can look at it your own time. But be prepared to cry. We definitely have some tear jerkers going on there in the returnship space for sure.
And Katie Miner has shared a link to the program too, for those who are interested. But it is a really great story about how we as an employer have been able to take advantage of a solution to this low labor participation rate, and bring people back into the labor market and benefit from that as an employer. So hopefully that spurs some ideas for others who may be listening to this panel, and we can keep this going. But we anticipate future success stories to come our way, and would be happy to report back to the group on those as well. If there aren't any more questions, why don't we transition to the other R's? I know there's a couple of other R's that are relevant to this discussion, where we've been able to deploy as a employer. Do you want to talk more about some of those other R's?
Yeah, first, thank you, Katie, for dropping the I call it the Tad story in the chat. He was he was one of the males hired, and he gets in details about his personal life that led him to a career break and then coming back. That's the confidence we're looking for. And yeah, Patty, I will drop that in the chat. I will get to for sure. Cheyenne Barker, we'll pull that up here in the next few minutes. The two other R's would be, so I think back to my example or my mentor, Rich Postler, when I introduced myself, and he would always talk about, and again, this might come across somewhat, he always said, we need to find the fringe, right? So he was talking about inclusion and access before inclusion and access were the buzzwords in HR. And I believe at the state of Utah, we're still doing that with inclusion and access for remote work and for rural work. Now, remote work is interesting because the why it started, or actually GOPB was well ahead of this prior to the pandemic. But the why remote work became a thing was extrapolated, intensified, and quantified quickly. What was that? March 14th of 2020, right? When the world changed. So it now in the remote work, we're trying to define the how, and we're getting into some additional strategy. And what I can tell you from the remote perspective is right now the state of Utah has over 9,000 employees that we've reviewed their jobs, and we've determined them eligible for remote work more than 50% of the time. And then we leave the rest of that up to typical manager and executive director discretion. As an example, within my direct reporting line, I ask for my team to be in office every Tuesday. Of course, it is considered part of the employee value proposition. It is a perk for them. They understand that. And we sign informal contracts that tie us together to the ability to be at home. I'm home today. I'm 15 minutes away from going and seeing my 5-week-old again for 5 minutes before my next meeting, and absolutely value and relish that opportunity. I will tell you, we asked all of our employees in May through the governor's annual survey, what would you like to do? And the data here is 64% of our staff would like to telework at least 2 days a week. So we've got a little bit of work to do on how to still break down some of the barriers that would keep some of our staff from working remote. Now, of course, there's some that can't. Correctional officers at the correctional facility, Utah Highway Patrol. So we'll run into natural resources, the park rangers. We'll run into limitations, but we're still challenging that. And that funnel comes in the recruiting. Whenever a new job is posted, should this be remote? It also comes to the second point, should this be rural? Just this week, Chief Pierpont rolled out a refresher for the state of Utah on rural hiring. I have some dashboards I'd be happy to share and show, but when we all started focusing on rural Utah through Executive Order 4 signed by Governor Cox that encouraged us to move more jobs to rural Utah. Roughly 25% of our 21,000 employees were in rural Utah. I'm gonna try to wow you, but make you laugh at the same time. After a year of tracking this, we're at 26.5%. So we've increased by 1.5%. And that doesn't sound all that significant till I tell you that number is actually 250 employees. So I just bragged about graduating 33 returners, right? I'm going to take credit also for the 250 roles that we've moved from urban Utah, which we consider really the Wasatch Front, to rural Utah. And I've heard governors specifically say a dollar goes further in rural. And so our dollars in rural with 250 jobs, anywhere from, I have direct reports now living in Vernal. I still don't actually, probably couldn't point it out on a map, but man, he's in fact, Wes, our EDIA accelerator, Pat, he lives full time in Vernal. So, it gets tricky in some parts of how to really manage to rural. Hybrid work situations we're still defining how, and we're trying to define how to become more strategic in that space. We were forced to do it, right? And now it's how do we bring cohesion as a team? So our iterations in rural and remote are only iterating, but we welcome the chance to continue to develop. Rural and remote Utah has a voice, and that they matter in Utah. And I'll pause there again. I think I've spoken for 15 minutes straight, and I'm going to go on mute on purpose.
No, John, that's great. And maybe I'll just share a personal story again related to our office. Just another example where we, as you all know, our budget office has taken on the responsibility of distributing all the coronavirus related funding for the state of Utah. And we are now, much of that funding is deployed. And of course, once you deploy that money, you've got to have monitoring and auditing and make sure that the money is being spent the way it's intended. We had the opportunity to, hire some folks to do some of that monitoring, and decided that, we would open that up and see if we can find a rural opportunity there. And we did find someone who is living in Carbon County, Kenilworth, actually. She does all of our grants monitoring, and it works out perfectly because some of the monitoring requires her to travel around the state, because the recipients, many of them were cities and towns around the state. So it makes sense for that position to be located somewhere in central Utah to then be able to go where needed. But it's an example. Not only does she work primarily remotely, but she also works in rural Utah, and now has a competitive wage for that area. And we're proud to have her as part of our team. And she comes up to Salt Lake whenever we have joint meetings, and we, accommodate her that way. But it's worked very well. And so all of the agencies, this was done by executive order, were asked and tasked to look within your departments and see what types of jobs do you have in your agencies. It can be provided remotely. And so the agencies responded, reevaluated which ones can be done that way. And it's a great thing. So not only are we, expanding opportunities for returners, but we're also expanding opportunities geographically and providing jobs to rural Utah where we can. And, we're just kind of starting this out. Of course, we mentioned this was kind of started in 2019, serendipitously before the pandemic. So we had a lot of that infrastructure and programming in place before the pandemic hit, which was nice. It was a blessing in disguise. And we hope to continue down that path and grow our efforts to do that long term. And so that gives you a sense of the R's returning to Utah. the state of Utah as employment and providing rural jobs and also doing that remotely. Anything else, John, you want to share on some of the things? I know that there's some exciting things we're doing around leave policies as well that relate to the audience here that would be very much interested, I think, in knowing what the state's doing there. But do you want to speak briefly just about some of our parental leave policies and kind of where we're wanting to trend in that respect?
Yeah, thank you. Great setup. Sophia comes in and always reminds me of a couple other points to hit. Again, relevant. My wife's British and she worked for the national healthcare system. So as we started our family together, we had never talked about this. And so she asked me, oh, so for the next year, should we just travel since you'll have it off? And I was like, oh, yeah. In the UK, they're used to 9 months paid off, and on both male and female, both mother and father. And reality check, when I told her about 4 months, I was like, oh, yeah, technically as of right now, I'm not really granted much time, but last year there was a bill passed that expanded parental leave for all parents. So my child being born August 4th, I was one of the first people to participate as it went into law on July 1 in expanded leave. And we gave every employee 120 hours, so 3 weeks that can be used intermittently over the first year. So you can imagine my schedule has been intermittent for the last little while, and grateful for that. I know that we're attempting to double down and attempting to attack it in even other ways on the postpartum side, and expanding that for parents as well, and with particular focus on the birthing on the birth parent, and that's going to become pretty relevant. We work with legislators also to make this a reality, but we have recommendations due to the governor here at the end of October. So that's been the big win, because prior to that didn't exist for me. And like I said, here I am, openly distracted in a very good way, and able to do so with the support not only of legislature, but of course my direct manager, Governor Cox, and others. So we're definitely winning. First step, right? First step. I don't think we've won, but we're winning. Yeah, Sophia?
Yeah, and I think the key phrase that John used was family. It's not targeting just women, but it's targeting the family. And I know, Pat, this has been a very big concentration of yours as well, to make sure our board has a good representation of men on the board who are trying to make positive changes, and also in all of the activities that the Women's Leadership Institute does, it's intentionally engaging men in the conversation just as much as women. And so the parental leave is another example of that, where it's we're trying to strive for a family-friendly environment. And then maybe I'll just share one other story related to our office. When we do our meetings, which many of them are remote, it's great because we end up seeing that it's a lot of our men on our team who are taking advantage of the flexible work environment. We often see the fathers on our team with their little children on their laps joining us for their meetings. And I know, traditionally you would think you would see the mothers participating more, but in our office, we have actually a lot of fathers who are taking advantage of that, and being able to, be at home with their children and participate in our meetings with their children on their lap. And it just makes me so happy to be able to see that it's actually a focus on the family, not just one participant of the family. And so I do want to stress that, because I think that's a big priority of the WLI, as well as for this administration, and the way and the lens through which we are viewing these types of policies. And so maybe with that, Pat, we can open it up and see if there's any questions or any interest from the parties on anything that's been discussed so far.
Sure. Anyone would like to ask a question? This has been fascinating. I do have a comment when everyone else is finished. So jump in or raise your hand. Let me just say that it was really inspiring to hear from both Robbie and John. One of the biggest challenges we see is that men are reluctant historically to take family leave. So much depends on what industry you're in, but to have role models like this who are men say this is really important to me and to my family, I think is a huge step forward. It's a game changer for Utah. I really commend the state for doing this. I think we need to shout this from the rooftops. I really do. Let people know of the great things that are going on here. I know I'll do my part to do that.
Thank you. I feel that was somewhat complimentary of me, but I need to make sure you hear that it's only because of the way our leadership operates. The only time the governor's checked in with me in the last 4 weeks was to make sure that Winston, my child, was doing okay. So he had very realistic expectations. I set my out of office on and said, guys, this is going to be the longest break I've ever taken in my professional career. And no one balked at that. So again, Sophia's team has done the majority of my work while I've been out and been picking up the slack. My direct reports, the governor himself has said, what are you doing? Why are you taking this call? And I said, it's important, right? I remember going to a meeting a few weeks ago, Sophia, and everyone looked at me sideways. And sure, I stepped away from my personal endeavors for 3 hours, but I just want to double down in a long-winded way of saying it has to come from everyone. And it quickly was adapted by those 40 to 50 senior leaders in the organization who said, look, this is important. And I've never felt that. I worked for a private equity firm. Of course I didn't. I didn't get to eat dinner, right? You guys know what that world's like. Or Procter and Gamble, which you've heard me run through. But this team is special, and it has to come from them. So they get the credit for my ability to be a professional slacker for a few weeks. That's for sure.
Are you getting any, Sophia? Are you getting any pushback from the legislature or anyone?
No, we have. I mean, we've had good, healthy discussions related to, just as during the session as we're evaluating what lead policies make sense from a budgetary standpoint and things like that. But I think for the most part, we've received a lot of support. I think the trend is in our favor. And I think that with the low unemployment rate, that we're in an environment where we can really make this a permanent thing. And, maybe I'll just plant the seed that we would love it if each of you kind of, help share that message too, and help make this a reality in the private sector as well, and talk a little bit more about what the state is doing, but sharing our message and sharing kind of the things that we're doing and the success we're having. I know that, the audience for the Women's Leadership Institute would be great too, where when we do our returnship cohort recruitments, we would love to have you help spread that word with your network, help us promote it so we can get as many candidates possible to participate, so that we can just keep perpetuating the positive change. But I think it's going to take everybody, and change comes slow sometimes, but I think because of the economic environment we're in, which Dr. Polson helped shed light on, that we're in a position where we can really take advantage of this, because it's really in the best interest of all employers to kind of go in this direction and tap into the population a little bit deeper and bring people back in to participate in the labor force.
Well, we need to wrap up, but I cannot thank you enough. Robbie, that was excellent information. Thank you so much for sharing that. John, You say what you want, but I see a lot in the business world that could learn from you and others that are supporting you. And Sophia, thank you so much for your leadership and for being part of the Women's Leadership Institute, and all of you who have joined us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Hi, Winston. Baby Winston
Oh
joined.
my goodness. Okay, you've got to speak so
perfect
we
ending.
can see a big picture. Can
There's
you?
the mic drop.
Oh, so cute. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.